Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. As we've talked in a number of episodes about the Iran-Israel war last summer, the 12-day war, and all different aspects of it, it was a really wild experience living here through it. And I guess, like a lot of people, I have the feeling that there was round one of a major thing that probably is going to break out again. Well, that's my prediction. Anyway, in Israel, we have conscription, as is well known, and the identities of the pilots who flew these missions is naturally very, very secret. But they did in Israeli TV, like as is frequently the case, they'll do kind of, I think the way they hide identities for when they're interviewing fighter pilots is to kind of talk to someone in their helmet, in the cockpit, and you can kind of make out, you can kind of guess approximately what age they are, even from just a couple of physical clues. In other cases, they acronymize. Is that a word? Acronymize? They acronymize the pilots, but they give their age. And what really, really astounded me was that some of these people, some of the pilots who flew these sorties were in their 20s, sometimes early 20s. I'm 36, so young enough to potentially even be my children. And I guess it just got me thinking, wow, I mean, how would it even feel to be, in your 20s, out of flight school, and get the call up that everyone's been kind of waiting for decades? The pressure and the sense of mission must just be monumental. But as probably the pilots will either never be able to tell their stories publicly or maybe not for decades, let's use our powers of imagination in the meantime. What I'd love to know, Herman and Corn, based on what's known about modern aerial warfare, the type that Israel participated in, when these pilots would have been flying the missions into Iran, obviously it's all been simulated, rehearsed so many times, and there's a precise mission. But I guess the big concern is air defenses, right? So there's a flood of information that I presume these men and women are receiving in the cockpits. Electronic warfare, counter-electronic warfare. How does it actually work? I know that's such a basic and far-ranging question, but if we were to put ourselves in the hypothetical position of a pilot who had just got the call up that morning, and I think a couple of the interviews I read said that, like when Israel attacked Egypt in 1967 war, the compartmentalization of information is pretty extreme. So some pilots got the information about the briefing just a few hours before they took off on the mission. So assuming that was the case, let's just imagine what it would be like to be a pilot on one of those missions. You get briefed a few hours before takeoff. I presume the energy is kind of crazy. And every flight has a crew behind it, not just the pilot in the cockpit, but people preparing the aircraft, loading the payloads, verifying all of that. So it's a team effort before the pilots go in the sky, but then they're up and flying across international airspace. Hypothetically, Herman and Corn, what do you think it would be like? Let's put ourselves in the position of a pilot flying a daredevil mission of national and global importance against Iran as occurred during the summer. Herman and Corn, over to you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn, and I'm sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother. It is a bit of a heavy one today, but honestly, it is something we have all been thinking about quite a bit lately.
Herman Poppleberry here. And you are right, Corn. This prompt from our housemate Daniel really gets to the heart of the tension we have been feeling. Daniel was asking about the reality of being a pilot on a mission against Iran. He pointed out something that often gets overlooked in the big geopolitical headlines, the sheer youth of the people in those cockpits. We are talking about pilots in their early 20s, often briefed only hours before they have to execute one of the most complex military operations in history.
It is a staggering thought. When I was 22, I was stressed out about midterms and whether I had enough coffee to get through a night of studying. These pilots are managing millions of dollars of hardware and the weight of national security. Daniel mentioned the 12-day war from last summer and the feeling that we might be looking at a round two. It makes the technical and psychological aspects he asked about even more relevant. Herman, you have been digging into the training and the tech side of this. Where does that even begin? How do you prepare a 23-year-old for something like this?
It starts much earlier than the mission briefing, Corn. The Israeli Air Force selection process is legendary for its intensity. It begins with the jibush, which is basically a multi-day physical and mental gauntlet designed to break you. They are looking for more than just flying skill. They are looking for cognitive flexibility. By the time a pilot is actually assigned to a squadron, they have gone through a 3-year flight academy where they also earn a university degree. But even after that, they are still kids in the eyes of most of the world. The high washout rate, which people sometimes call the katsir or the harvest, means that only the most resilient remain.
Right. But there is a difference between being resilient in a training exercise over the Negev and actually crossing international borders toward a hostile integrated air defense system. Daniel asked about that specific pressure of being briefed only hours before takeoff. That seems like a deliberate choice for operational security, but it must be a massive shock to the system.
It is the ultimate test of what Hassard-Lee calls the art of clear thinking. He is a former F-35 instructor who wrote a great book on this. The idea is to have your baseline skills so deeply ingrained that when the unexpected happens or when the pressure spikes, you have the mental bandwidth to actually solve problems. When those pilots get the call, they are not starting from scratch. They have flown thousands of hours in simulators. They have practiced the specific routes, the refueling points, and the target profiles. But you are right, the weight of the actual mission is different. You are flying over thousands of kilometers of territory where you are not exactly welcome.
Let's talk about that distance. To get from here to Iran, you are looking at a flight path that likely crosses multiple countries. That is a long time to be in a cockpit, especially if you are in a single-seat fighter like an F-35 or an F-16. How do they handle the logistics of that? Daniel mentioned the technical complexity of air defenses, but the sheer endurance seems like a hurdle on its own.
It is a massive hurdle. Aerial refueling is the backbone of any mission like this. Israel relies heavily on its fleet of modified Boeing 707 tankers known as the Ream. These are aging aircraft, but they are the lifeline. Imagine being a young pilot. It is the middle of the night, you are over a desert thousands of miles from home, and you have to hook up to a flying gas station while maintaining total radio silence. If you miss that connection, the mission is over, or worse, you don't have enough fuel to get back.
And while they are doing that, they are probably being painted by radar from every direction. This brings us to the air defense question. Iran has invested heavily in systems like the S-300 PMU-2. These are not toys. They are sophisticated, long-range surface-to-air missiles. When a pilot enters that airspace, what does the cockpit actually look like? Are they seeing a million red lights, or is it more subtle than that?
In a modern fifth-generation jet like the F-35, it is actually surprisingly clean. The goal of modern avionics is to reduce the pilot's cognitive load. Instead of a bunch of individual gauges, they have a massive touchscreen and a helmet-mounted display. The system does something called sensor fusion. It takes data from the radar, the electronic warfare suite, and even other planes in the formation, and it creates a single picture of the battlefield. It will show them a ring on the map that represents the lethal range of a missile battery. The pilot's job is to stay outside that ring or use electronic warfare to punch a hole through it.
You mentioned electronic warfare. That was another part of Daniel's prompt. We often think of warfare as just missiles and bombs, but there is this invisible layer of combat happening simultaneously. How does that play out for a pilot? Are they actively jamming signals, or is the plane doing that automatically?
It is a bit of both. The F-35 has a suite called the ASQ-239, which is a highly advanced electronic warfare system. It can identify, locate, and track enemy radar emissions. It can even jam them with incredible precision. But the pilot still has to make tactical decisions. If they see a new radar pop up that wasn't in the briefing, they have to decide, do I jam it and risk giving away my position, or do I try to fly around it? This is where that early 20s brain is actually an advantage. There is some research suggesting that younger people are better at processing rapid-fire visual information and switching between complex tasks.
That is a fascinating point. We often think of youth as a liability because of a lack of experience, but maybe in a high-tech cockpit, that neuroplasticity is exactly what you want. It reminds me of what we discussed back in episode 362 about the geometry of secrets and how complexity can be a shield. In this case, the complexity of the onboard systems is what allows a human to survive in an environment that is fundamentally lethal to humans.
Exactly. And let's not forget the sheer speed of everything. When you are flying at Mach 1.6, things happen fast. If a missile is launched at you, you might have only seconds to react. You have to trust your flare and chaff dispensers, you have to execute high-G maneuvers, and you have to keep track of your wingman. It is a level of multitasking that is almost impossible to imagine.
I want to go back to the psychological side for a moment. Daniel mentioned that these pilots are briefed only hours before. In the history of the Israeli Air Force, like the Osirak raid in 1981 or the strike on the Syrian reactor in 2007, the pilots often didn't know the full scope of the mission until very late. How do they keep their cool? You are sitting in a briefing room. Someone tells you that you are about to fly a mission that could literally change the course of global history, and then you have to walk out to your plane and do a pre-flight check.
It is about compartmentalization. They focus on the checklist. Oxygen? Check. Flight controls? Check. Navigation waypoints? Check. By focusing on the small, manageable tasks, they prevent the enormity of the mission from overwhelming them. There is also a huge amount of trust involved. They trust the intelligence officers who planned the route, they trust the ground crews who loaded the munitions, and they trust their commanders. It is a collective effort. Even though there is only one person in that cockpit, there are hundreds of people behind them.
It makes me think about the burden of responsibility. If something goes wrong, it is not just a tactical failure. It could be a diplomatic disaster. Flying through international airspace requires a delicate dance. Sometimes there are quiet agreements with other countries, and sometimes it is a matter of staying below the radar, literally and figuratively. The pressure to not make a mistake that triggers a wider conflict must be immense.
Absolutely, and that is why the training focuses so much on ethics and decision-making. They are taught that just because you have a target in your sights doesn't mean you should always pull the trigger. If they see civilians, or if the situation on the ground has changed in a way that makes the mission too risky, they are expected to have the maturity to abort. That is a lot to ask of a 21-year-old. But that is the standard they are held to.
We talked about the S-300, but there is also the threat of Iranian interceptors. Iran still flies older planes like the F-414 Tomcat and the F-4 Phantom, along with some newer Russian models. How much of a threat are those in a modern context? Does a pilot in an F-35 even worry about a dogfight anymore?
The era of the classic dogfight, like you see in movies, is mostly over. Modern air combat is about BVR, or beyond visual range. The goal is to see the enemy and shoot them down before they even know you are there. An F-35 has such a low radar cross-section that it can get very close to older planes without being detected. But Iran has been working on their own radar networks and trying to integrate their systems with Russian help. There is always the risk of a lucky shot or a coordinated ambush. The pilots are trained for every scenario, including air-to-air combat. But the hope is always to use stealth and electronic warfare to avoid it entirely.
This really highlights the evolution of warfare. It is becoming less about physical brawn and more about information dominance. If you have better data, you win. Daniel's question about how they handle the technical aspects really points to this. It is like they are flying a supercomputer that also happens to have wings and missiles.
That is exactly what it is. And the pilots are the system administrators. They are managing data flows as much as they are flying the plane. It is interesting you mentioned the information side because that is where the electronic warfare gets really deep. It is not just about jamming, it is about deception. You can make an enemy radar see 10 planes where there is only one, or make it look like you are miles away from your actual position. It is a digital hall of mirrors.
Let's talk about the return trip. You have completed your mission, the adrenaline is starting to fade, but you still have a 3-hour flight home. You are probably low on fuel, you have to hit another tanker, and you are still in hostile or semi-hostile airspace. That seems like the most dangerous part in some ways, just because of the fatigue.
Fatigue management is a huge part of the mission planning. They use various techniques to stay alert, but there is no substitute for the sheer relief of crossing back into friendly airspace. The debriefing starts the moment they land. They have to download all the data from the plane, talk through every decision they made, and help the intelligence teams understand what happened. There is no time to just go home and sleep.
It is a remarkable life. I think Daniel's prompt really humanizes a topic that we usually only see through the lens of satellite photos and dry news reports. These are young people with families and lives here in Jerusalem, or Tel Aviv, or the Galilee, and they are carrying this incredible burden.
It really does. And it makes you realize how much we depend on their professionalism. Whether you agree with the politics of the missions or not, the technical and psychological feat of executing them is undeniable. It is a combination of cutting-edge technology and the oldest human traits: courage, discipline, and trust.
So, looking forward, how do you see this changing? As AI becomes more integrated into the cockpit, does the role of the pilot change? Do we still need a 22-year-old in the seat, or does it become a remote operation?
That is the big question for the next decade. We are already seeing the development of loyal wingman drones, where a piloted jet controls a swarm of unmanned aircraft. But for the most sensitive missions, the ones with the highest stakes, there is still a strong belief that you need a human on the scene. Someone who can sense the nuances of a situation that an algorithm might miss. The human in the loop is still the ultimate fail-safe.
That makes sense. An AI might be better at calculating a flight path, but it doesn't understand the weight of a national mission the way a person does. Herman, this has been a really enlightening deep dive. It is a lot to process, especially living where we do.
It really is. I think the key takeaway for me is just the sheer scale of the preparation. Nothing is left to chance, but in the end, it still comes down to the individual in that seat.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. From the training academy to the electronic warfare suites, it is clear that modern aerial warfare is a world of its own.
Definitely. And it is a world that is constantly evolving. What was true 5 years ago might not be true today. We have to keep learning and keep asking these kinds of questions.
Absolutely. And speaking of questions, we really appreciate Daniel sending this one in. It pushed us to look at the human side of something that often feels very mechanical. If you're listening and you found this interesting, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show.
It really does. We love seeing the community grow. And remember, you can find all our past episodes on Spotify and at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have covered everything from military probes to the geometry of secrets, so there is plenty to dive into if you are new here.
Like episode 363, where we talked about the anatomy of failure in military probes. It actually connects quite well to what we were saying about the pressure to avoid mistakes.
That is a great point. The stakes are so high that any failure is scrutinized for years. It is a tough environment to work in.
Well, I think that is a wrap for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the cockpit.
Thanks, everyone. It has been a pleasure. Until next time.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will see you in the next episode.
Take care, everyone.
Herman, I think we should go grab some lunch. All this talk of flight rations and adrenaline has made me hungry.
Sounds like a plan, Corn. Let's see if Daniel is around. Maybe he wants to join us.
Good idea. He probably has 5 more prompts ready to go.
I wouldn't doubt it for a second. That is the beauty of living with him. There is never a dull moment.
True that. All right, let's head out.
See you guys later. Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts.
Bye, everyone.
I wonder if we should have talked more about the specific fuel capacity of the Ram tankers. It is actually quite fascinating how they modified those old 77s.
Maybe in the next one, Herman. I think we gave them enough technical details for one day.
you are probably right. I tend to get a bit carried away with the specs.
That is why I am here to keep us on track.
And I appreciate it. All right, lunchtime.
Let's go.
One more thing. Did you know the first Israeli pilots were actually trained on old Czech versions of the Messerschmitt? It is amazing how far they have come in 75 years.
Okay, now you are definitely monologuing. Let's get that food.
Guilty as charged. Let's go.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. We really value your support and your curiosity. It is what keeps this show going.
Absolutely. Keep those prompts coming. You can use the contact form on our website if you have something you want us to explore.
We will catch you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Wait, did I mention the helmet-mounted displays? They cost about $400,000 each.
Herman,
Okay, I'm done. Let's go.
seriously though, that is an insane amount of money for a helmet.
Well, it's not just a helmet, it's a computer. But yeah, it's wild.
Alright, for real this time. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
We're actually leaving now.
Yes, we are.
Okay, good.
But seriously, the sensor fusion...
Herman,
Sorry, let's go.
this has been episode 365 of My Weird Prompts. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out our website at myweirdprompts.com for more.
And don't forget to follow us on Spotify. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm really hungry now.
Me too. Let's find some hummus.
Perfect.
Alright, signing off.
Signing off.
Peace.
Peace.
And we are out.
Out.
Really out.
Get it.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Silence.
Silence.
One more thing.
No.
Just kidding. Let's go.
You almost had me.
I know.
Let's go.
Okay.
Door closes.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.